See how we go. Ah, yes, it's coming up. Can you see that?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, well, over to you, Zachary.
Okay, friends, well, my little presentation starts with a brief overview of the current Parliament of Victoria legislation in regard to public health and health-related matters. So next slide, George, please. Okay, we start 12 years ago with the Public Health and Wellbeing Act 2008. And it's interesting that on the bottom of the black type, you can see amendments were made to this act as of 1 March, which is just sort of before the coronavirus pandemic or outbreak really started to get going here. I don't know if that's coincidence or not, I really don't know, but it's interesting. Anyway, if you look at this on the internet, you'll find 271 rather boring pages of legislation and laws. And there are a few nasty surprises if you look at the details. Okay, George, next slide, please.
Makes you wonder who's putting these things together.
Well, it would be the, I think, the office of the State Attorney General, who is Jill Hennessy at this present point in time. She would have obviously a fairly high-powered team of legal experts working under her to write this legislation to make sure it's in accordance with all the other acts and so on.
Yeah.
Okay, Part 10 of this 2008 Public Health Act is in regard to the powers to investigate, eliminate, or reduce public health risks. And one section of that, Section 187, is restriction on the entry to residential premises. Next slide, please, George. Okay, well, I'll just read it. This section applies in respect of the exercise of a power conferred on any person by a provision of this act to enter any residential premises without a warrant. Oh, without a warrant, that's very interesting. But then in the second part, we read sort of a caveat or limitation on the first part, which is the power to enter can only be exercised to enter that part of the residential premises to which entry is necessary for the purposes for which the power is conferred. And this to me is a good example of how legislations at the state level, even perhaps at the Commonwealth level, can seem to be contradictory. My firm belief from a study of common law dating back to 2005 when I first started is that anyone of reasonable education or intellectual ability should be able to access this legislation on the internet and get a fairly clear idea what's going on. So if they want to represent themselves in court, instead of paying $200 or $300 or $400 an hour to a legal professional, a solicitor, barrister, lawyer, they can basically step in front of the magistrate and say, well, Your Honor, this is the case which I present, and it's based upon Section 178.1 of the Public Health and Wellbeing Act 2008. Problem is, the legislation is often written in such obtuse and legal terms, I call it legalese, that it's very difficult, if not impossible, for even a person of average or even high intelligence to make much sense of it. And that leads me to suspect that this legislation is written in order to keep us bound up, enslaved, if you wish, to the legal system and legal professionals, so that if you or I are hauled before a court or want to go before a court, we're going to have to fork out $200, $300, $400, $400 an hour to a legal professional to represent us because the legislation is so difficult to understand. That's my outlook or view. You may have your own. Next slide, George.
Yeah.
Okay, now we get to this year, to April of 2020, with the COVID-19 Omnibus Emergency Measures Bill 2020. And what's in black type here is basically in the act. It's a bill for an act to temporarily amend certain acts and to temporarily empower the making of regulations to modify the application of the law of Victoria in certain respects for the purpose of responding to the COVID-19 pandemic and for other purposes. Well, that's well and good. Anyway, it passed the Parliament in April of 2020, just as the coronavirus outbreak was really starting to hit hard in the state. And if you want to go on the internet and look at the legislation, it's basically 296 boring pages of legalese. That's what it is, legalese. No one, in my opinion anyway, no one in their right mind would really want to spend much time poring over this stuff unless you're getting paid $200, $300, $400 an hour by a client to look at it, because it's so boring, so contorted, and so confusing in certain places. And that's my criticism against a lot of these acts and bills and legislation that are on the books that have been passed by this or that parliament. Next slide, please, George. Now, this is from the first section or introduction to this bill, the April 2020 COVID bill. And you can see you're looking at a whole lot of other acts, and this is just one part. It goes on for a good 2 or 3 pages in the legislation if you want to look at it. Amendment of the Local Government Act, Amendment of the Parliamentary Committee Act, Amendment of the Planning and Environment Act, Amendment of Safe Patient Care, Workplace Interrelation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's
It looks
real
a bit
chore.
like they're just covering their backside.
Well, they are, because if this stuff is going to be challenged in the court, in the Supreme Court of Victoria, or even at a higher level, a federal court level, or even the High Court of Australia, they want to cover themselves and make sure that it's all proper, and that you or I or anyone else who wants to challenge it doesn't have much chance to win in those higher levels. We go to the next slide, please, George. Okay, the current legislation under discussion is the COVID-19 Omnibus Emergency Measures and Other Acts Amendment Bill 2020. That's the controversial one. And this time it's only 23 boring pages of legalese, and once again involving many changes and amendments to many existing bills or acts. Can we get the next slide, please, George?
Oops. Well, what have I done here? Give me a minute.
Okay, we'll just wait. We'll just wait.
Just got to close a window.
Okay.
Only 23 boring pages. Wow.
Only 23. Maybe enough, few enough for the average person to plow through it. But as you can see, and this is just one part of the beginning of this act, it has all these changes to all these existing bills, legislation, and there's a lot more than what's on the screen, I can tell you. I didn't want to bore you with the full version of the full list of what acts are being amended, because it's simply too boring, and not many people would be interested, unless they're getting paid $200, $300, $400 an hour or more to look at this legislation. And that's, in my opinion, a real problem with the current legal system we have in the state, other states, and in the Commonwealth as a whole. It's a real problem. Next slide, please, George. Okay, what's the mainstream media stating about the new bill? And this passed the Victoria Legislative Assembly, or the lower house of Parliament, on the 18th September. Well, this was from an article written 3 days prior, on 15th September, by Paul Sackle, who's an Age reporter. Quote, new powers to detain people considered a high risk of negligently spreading COVID-19 are set to be debated in state parliament this week. The Victorian government could also enlist protective services officers and WorkSafe inspectors. Okay, well, interesting. Where are the police? Well, we're not talking about police. We're just talking about protective service officers and WorkSafe inspectors to enforce public health directions under the proposed law. And that, of course, sets a lot of alarm bells going off. Why are we giving so much power? Why does Premier Andrews and the ALP want to give so much power to protective service officers and work-safe inspectors? Anyway, people suspected by health authorities of being likely to spread the virus if they are coronavirus positive or a close contact of an infected person could be forcibly detained if the bill is passed. And this is what is setting off alarm bells in this state and other states. Thank God, this stuff is so draconian. Forcibly detained by a health worker or a work-safe inspector if they suspect that you're COVID positive or have been in contact with a coronavirus person? Very interesting. Next slide, please, George.
Yeah.
It's the thought police.
Words like suspect and likely are just too vague to be used in the legal.
Exactly.
court.
Too vague.
Yeah.
And this is a continuation of the Age article from 15 September. The rules confirmed to the Age by a state government spokesman could be applied to conspiracy theorists. That's a lot of us, of course, or so we would be considered by the establishment, who refuse to self-isolate, or severely drug-affected or mentally impaired people who do not have the capacity to quarantine. Those caught under the new rules could be detained in places where they could be monitored, such as hotels. And we all know about the fiasco of the hotel quarantine under the Andrews government that played out in, I think since March, April, May, and so on. We all know about that. Those details are coming out now thanks to the Royal Commission. The Omnibus Emergency Measures Bill proposes new powers the government says will strengthen the state's pandemic response, including broadening the types of government employees who can act as authorized officers. And from my understanding, that includes doctors, nurses, other healthcare workers. So, gee, you're a doctor or you're a nurse, and you actually wanted to be a cop, a policeman when you grew up, but that didn't work out. And now, as a doctor or as a nurse, a healthcare worker, guess what, folks? Premier Andrews wants to give you some powers normally reserved for the police. How interesting. The state of emergency and state of disaster allow the officers to detain any person for the period reasonably necessary to eliminate or reduce a serious risk to public health. Now, this is the really sinister part, the worst part of it, in my opinion, coming up. The officers can also restrict movement, search premises without a warrant, and give other directions which are deemed necessary to protect public health. How interesting. Next slide, please, George.
Yeah, just to comment on that.
Go ahead.
What I've got off the Solutions Empowerment website and webinars is that anyone, you or I or anyone, can, if they know enough about constitutional powers, and it's not that difficult. You can read the Constitution in a couple of hours. You can self-appoint yourself as a Commonwealth public officer, and it sounds like all those items that you brought up in that slide would be pushing beyond what the Constitution allows for, and so you can actually declare that you're a Commonwealth public officer, and you can put people under arrest and other powers, and it's covered in the criminal code as well. You can use that if you know enough about what you're doing. And it seems to me that it's not that complicated. The Constitution is not that big a document. It's 128 sections. It's not 269 pages of boring legislation, as you put it before, or for some of the other stuff anyway. Anyway, I'll move on.
Okay, next, yeah, go to the next slide, please. Okay, this is an article from the Australian Associated Press, written about a week after the Age article, 26 September. Prominent legal figures want the Victorian government to change its controversial COVID-19 omnibus bill, calling some of the provisions unprecedented, excessive, and open to abuse. Now, there are 14 retired judges and QCs, that's Queen's Counsels, considered the highest level of legal expertise in the legal profession. They published an open letter saying they're deeply concerned that the bill went through State Parliament's lower house last week. The list of QCs putting their name to the letter include retired High Court Judge Michael McHugh. When you get a judge, a former judge from the High Court of Australia, stepping forward and saying, I don't like this legislation, that should raise some alarm bells, I reckon. And then you've got two judges from the federal court, former judges, Peter Heery and Neil Young, and they're also saying, watch out, folks, watch out, Victoria, this is not a good thing. And yeah, I agree with you, Chum, it's fantastic. These guys are speaking up. Next slide, George. This is once again from the AAP article. Growing concerns about a section of the bill that gives more powers to authorized officers to detain people as part of the state government's coronavirus restrictions. Authorizing citizens to detain their fellow citizens on the basis of a belief that the detained person is unlikely to comply with emergency directions by the authorized citizens is unprecedented, excessive, and open to abuse, the letter reads. We call on the Legislative Council to amend the bill or vote against it. And I feel very strongly in agreement with the statements. Next slide, please, George. Once again from the article, they said emergency powers already in place allow authorized officers to detain people and restrict movement. The bill would also allow any person the Secretary considered appropriate to be authorized to exercise emergency powers. There would be no requirement that persons authorized be police officers or even public servants. And in my opinion, we really want to reserve powers of detention, arrest, detainment to police officers who have undergone the necessary training. That's my strong belief. This bill goes far, far beyond that. Next slide, please, George.
So that means that a security guard in a hotel, for instance.
It could well mean that, in my interpretation.
It's just a private militia.
Could be.
Well,
yeah.
that's the word that comes to mind for me is private militia.
Yeah.
Authorized.
Privateers. It's pirates.
Yeah.
Okay, can we go next slide, please, George? Okay, the bill has already passed the lower house, the Legislative Assembly, and that's because the Premier, Dan Andrews, and the ALP have the numbers in that chamber to pass whatever they want. Now, the fate of the bill now, addressed in the upper house, the Legislative Council. The bill will be debated and voted on in that chamber during the week of 12 October. So we've got a good 10 days or so to mobilize against it, which is good. Because the Premier and the ALP do not have the numbers there, the matter rests with the independent and minor party MPs, and there are persons like Fiona Patton from the Reason Party, and she's already said she's going to vote against the bill in its current form. Thank you, Fiona. Next slide, please.
Yeah, don't thank Fiona just yet.
Okay.
No, she's slippery, that one.
I've heard that from other sources, by the way.
She's real slippery.
We'll see.
You can't
Okay.
take the word for anything.
Okay, fine. There's one Victorian Greens MP in the upper house, one Animal Justice Party, 2 MPs in Darren Hinch's Justice Party, 2 MPs in the Liberal Democrats, and some others. So it's quite a mixed bag. The passage of the bill rests in their collective hands, and that's why it's important to contact as many persons as you can by email on or before 12 October and ask them to vote against it. And the response so far is encouraging. And whether you trust Fiona Patton or not, she's said she'll vote against it. Darren Hinch's Justice Party, Liberal Democrats, and so on. So at this point in time, it seems to be encouraging, but we don't know. We don't know actually what the final outcome will be.
Patton and Hinch both said they would vote against the previous one and changed at the 11th hour.
Okay. Well, the deal is this, as we know, as most people know. Daniel Andrews and his ministers are going to try to cut some deals with these independent and minor party MPs. They're going to say, I'm going to give you this if you vote for the bill, And some of these MPs won't be able to resist it. They'll say, "Oh yeah, I've been wanting to pass, because this legislation or that legislation passed. Now's my chance." And that's the problem. It's not really a system of democracy, in my opinion. It's a system of backroom deals. And we could talk about that for hours, but we don't have the time, of course. We go for the next slide, George. Okay. I received an email a few days ago from a friend of mine with an attachment from someone obviously in common constitutional law. And it's a textbook example of how not to proceed. And once again, these are comments from the individual in that common law, constitutional law community. I couldn't get the accompanying photos to download, but it starts in the red. Official version: the death of the Andrews government, the greatest deception and fraud on the men, women, and families of Victoria. All laws since 18 November 1875 in the state of Victoria have been invalid. Well, maybe that's their opinion, but that's obviously rubbish. You know, you stand in front of any magistrate or any judge or any justice in any court in Victoria, any federal court, and try to throw that argument, and they'll just laugh at you. So that's a complete waste of time. Next slide, please, George.
They might be technically correct, but anyway.
They might be correct, but you've got to prove it in the courts. That's the problem.
Yeah.
That's the problem with the common constitutional law community. They're full of theories.
Yeah.
Some of them seem to be good theories, to be correct. But the bottom line for me is, if you have a hot common law, constitutional law argument, then go before the courts and get a victory. And if you can get a victory or a win, then I'll be the first person to praise you. And I'll say, yeah, look what this person did. The problem is with common constitutional law, it's mostly theory. I'm sorry, because I've been there, my friends. I fought a court battle in 2011 and 2013 against property rates here in Hepburnshire, and I lost. And had I been dumb enough to appeal my loss into the Supreme Court of Victoria, I would have lost there as well, and then walked away with cost somewhere between $30,000 and $40,000. So that is not the way to go. And fortunately, I wasn't stupid enough to go down that path. Some people have, and they've lost their properties, they've lost their homes. But that's a different story. We're looking at this bill now. So if we go to the next slide, please, George.
Yeah, that's why I mentioned at the close to the beginning, you got to be working at the top of the pyramid, but you really got to know what you're doing. If you have one little item loose, then that's what happens. You lose. It's got to be so tight. But anyway,
yeah.
Another story.
Yeah. And this is a continuation of that pamphlet, common law, constitutional law pamphlet. Linda DeSalle, she is the governor or governor appointed, governor appointment to be Victoria. Daniel Andrews, of course, is the premier. Jill Hennessy is the minister, is the attorney general. Marilyn Warren is the head of the court system here. These four faces, and there were photos of these people, which I couldn't download. These four faces have no legitimate vested authority with any mandate in the state of Victoria to invoke a new national security law under a communist agenda against Victorian electors and their families. The problem is that when you start accusing people of communist agendas, that's a very subjective type of charge. And it's not, in my opinion, a very intelligent one, because then you start getting into the left versus right, political agenda, and you get into a quagmire, and that's not the way to go. And the pamphlet continues, this is now a constitutional crisis. Daniel Andrews must be removed, and Governor DeSalle has no choice but to resign. Well, good luck on that, folks. Next slide, please, George.
Sounds like political point scoring, Liberals trying to sort of dig the knife in.
Yeah, in this case, it's constitutional common law people trying to dig the knife in.
Right.
And it continues, blah, 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 blah. Our country, our forefathers who fought for freedom, their work has been stolen by an illegitimate government that has no vested power and no law under the caretaker governor. Well, if that's your position, then go and get a victory in the courts, mate. I mean, that's my outlook. If you really feel that, well, go into the courts and show me a victory, and then I'll be the first to say, yeah, that's good. So anyway, that's not the way to go, in my opinion. And final slide, George. It's a complete waste of time to go down that path. Show the futility and impotence of this common law constitutional approach, even if some of the comments may be accurate or they are semi-accurate. Please don't waste your time, friends. Don't waste your time. Okay, George, it's over to you now for your section.
Oh, okay. All right. Let me close that one. I'd actually like to bring up your email or my email because it's got the same information. Yeah, I think it'll come up this time.
Yep, there it is.
So that's the email I sent out to several thousand earlier in the week. And it contains the complete original template that Zachary put together, starting with "Hello, friends," and I think what Zachary's done tonight is incorporated that into PowerPoint that we've just finished with. But if anybody hasn't seen this material before, I'm just scrolling through it so it can be part of the video, because I thought it was pretty spot on information. And right at the bottom of that is, or towards the bottom, is a suggested letter that we can all send in. Dear MPs in the Victoria Legislative Council, and there's the letter that I'm just scrolling through. You can modify it if you wish, and then sincerely yours. And I wanted to show the emails of those independent MPs that it can be addressed to. So
Just one correction there, George. I learned since sending the email out that Ellen Sandell is actually not in the Legislative Council. She's in the Legislative Assembly. She's a Greens, Victorian Greens MP in the lower house. She did vote against the legislation in September, but so you don't have to send it to Ellen Sandell because that's not a correct. I mean, the address is correct, but she is in the lower house, and we have to contact the MPs in the upper house on that.
Okay. Well, it looks like a useful run through the letter itself and the emails. That's what you can, if you've got the time and the energy, put together your own little letter and send it to all these emails. It would be have some sort of effect. Is it?
As I said, I did that and I got 3 responses, I think. I did that a few days after Zachary sent it out, and I forwarded it also to a few people who were interested, and I'm assuming that they also submitted it. But if everybody could forward it on to friends, it would multiply the effect.
Yeah. I was hoping some of the other groups that I connect to would have been on the Zoom tonight. But anyway, we've got. Oh, yeah, this is other stuff that's in the email. But anyway. Pretty interesting description of chemtrails, like you've never heard before, come from medical medium. That was in the email as well. Anyway, that's just a quick run through of the suggested template letter that you can send. So close that one. Now, if I'm still on the schedule, yeah, the next share screen that I wanted to bring up, a range of stories that have been sent to me or I've picked up on the internet, and I took a note of each one as I went along. So this one's the 21st Century Australia movement saying that Dan Andrews' corruption is being exposed. This one, next one, I think most of us know of Advocate Me, and she's just put out Serene's just put out a little bit of text talking about the concern with the omnibus bill and its looming expansion and extension. She's saying that these changes elevate regulations above acts. In other words, unelected regulations become supreme. And there's the gulag she's brought up. The next one. Now, who is this from? Anyway, Victorians have lost confidence in Daniel Andrews and Labor. Add your name to the list of Victorians who have no confidence in Daniel Andrews and Labor. The rest of that's disappeared. Even the Australian newspaper is talking about the Premier's terrifying Orwellian term, handling out astonishing powers of arrest. New laws set down for Victoria are a terrifying attack on civil liberty, unlike anything ever seen in Australia. All right.
We should understand, though, that the Australian is traditionally very, very anti-Labor and very, very pro-coalition. So it's hard to get an article from the Australian that's balanced, in my opinion. But if you're going to talk about the Robert Godlewson article, I would say that's a pretty good one.
Yeah, I mean, the reason I'm showing coming from all different directions, saying this legislation is not good for us.
Yeah.
Where's this one? This is the Victorian Bar. Now, I think you mentioned this previously. The bar itself is raising concerns about the COVID-19 Omnibus Bill 2020. Yeah, those who are not trained as health professionals need to be appointed as authorised officers is of significant concern. Another one, all in the last few days. And this is an ex or a former chief science officer of one of the pharmaceutical companies. And he's saying that there is no science to, it goes off the screen there, to suggest a second wave should happen. The Big Pharma insider asserts that false positive results from inherently unreliable COVID-19 tests are being used to manufacture a second wave based on so-called new cases. Right, so that's coming from a former pharmaceutical source. Global Research, another one. Some of us might have heard of Michael Smith News. The big players, Andrews, Mikakos, Neville, Pakula, and others, referred for prosecution under criminal provisions of Victoria's Occupational Health and Safety Act. Well, wish them luck.
Yeah.
There's a hive of activity going on.
Yeah, sounds good. What's happening? This
is an interesting article relating to end times, and it's you can have a read of this description of how current events relate to what's going on. I found it pretty interesting. It goes on for quite some time. Yeah, whether you are aware of it or not, we are smack bang in the middle of the Third World War. Perhaps that's true. This is a good versus evil war and the most important war ever fought. Yeah, we need to get this right, and something that's been said to us is we could do with a win, and let's see how we go in the next couple of weeks. Something that John might be talking about a bit later.
I think that's John. That's in John's section. That article.
Yeah, I thought.
Is that right, John?
Yeah. I thought I'd just quickly mention it. It's just part of this little collection that I put together. The Andrews corruption being exposed. How does a company not even based in Victoria, that was not a registered supplier to the Victorian government, get given a $30 million contract for 3 months' work without a full competitive tender process? The company it's referring to is the security company I think they were going to use for the hotel situation. And it was $10 million a month for 3 months. Golly, if they had contacted me and my mates would have done it for $1 million. Anyway. And
bargain prices. You have bargain prices there, George.
I'd give them a bargain price, you know,
Yeah.
$30 million bucks, and they're not even a Victorian company. I don't even know what they are. The ominous bill with Advocate Me. There's the link for that. Detainment for a preemptive crime sounds like something from Nazi Germany, and that is because it was. Yet this is technically what the Victorian government is insisting on under the guise it is in the best interests of public health. We see it as false imprisonment, and the Victorian government has already undertaken this when they chose to detain large groups of people in a number of public housing estates in Melbourne earlier this year. We all remember that. This was a manifestation of the omnibus bill, a test run of what is to come. Yeah, so yeah, Advocate Me is leading the charge with these class actions, and very useful to check out her information. Another story. Victorians have lost confidence in Daniel Andrews and Labor. Oh, you can say that again. I wish the election was tomorrow. Victoria is not suffering from death and damage due to bad luck, but due to the bad decisions made by the Daniel Andrews and the Labor government in hotel quarantine and delays and botching of contact tracing. Yeah, maybe true, maybe not. But anyway, it's a botched job either way. Another story, and this is in the Australian conservative newspaper. Premier's terrifying Orwellian turn, handing out astonishing powers of arrest. New laws set down for Victoria are a terrifying attack on civil liberty unlike anything ever seen in Australia. And here again we have the bar, the Victorian and the Australian bar speaking out and raising concerns about this COVID-19 bill. The concerns about the provisions of the bill tabled in Parliament on 17th of September refer principally to the broad and generic criteria on which authorised officer appointments may be made under Section 30 of the Act. The proposed criteria potentially open the door for those who are not trained as health professionals to be appointed as authorised officers. This is of significant concern as it is imperative that the qualifications of these officers are relevant to the public health functions that they are intended to perform. Each one of these stories has got a story to it, and again, they're all in the last few days. What's this one? Oh, that's the one we mentioned before about the former pharmaceutical company representative. And what's he saying? In a stunning development, the chief science officer of the giant Pfizer says there is no science to suggest a second wave should happen. The big pharma insider asserts that false positive results from inherently unreliable COVID tests, and there's plenty of information on how unreliable they are being used to manufacture a second wave based on new cases. And then we've got the story about Andrews et al. others referred for prosecution on the 29th of September under criminal provisions of Victorian's Occupational Health and Safety Act. Worth a read as well. How current events relate to end times, making sense of 2020. This is the one which talks about we're in the middle of Third World War, like a good versus evil battle. According to the study material we work with, there is no such thing as good versus evil, but we use those terms in order to define ourselves, so they are valid. To not declare anything as evil is the biggest evil, according to that information. Right? So we can't put our heads in the sand and pretend it's not happening. We need to speak out. And this last story, that's the Mike Adams natural news story.
That down?
Police can kidnap people for medical reasons.
Okay.
Anything, including underwear, to forcibly administer vaccines. Right, so that's my little collection only of the last few days. And there was one more, which I've got on a PDF document. And let's see if we can share that one.
These people are totally brilliant. It's sensational.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it?
You are.
Okay. Yeah, this is a story in the Australian Business Legal Affairs section, labelled as an astonishing attack on democracy. Right, so the big time newspapers, as well as the bar and the various other groups, are all questioning this legislation, and it would actually amaze me if it gets passed. It would amaze me if the independents don't help us to defeat this bill. However, it needs our intent. It needs our input in order to help it along, right? So I'm encouraging everyone to send off the letter. And this one here with Robert Bottlesburn. Let's go to the, first of all, the very end. Hang on a sec. Oh, okay. All right. Sorry, I've got to let somebody in. But anyway, I'll get round to that. I go to the end of this article. Yeah, Robert is a business columnist of more than 50 years, writing and commentating about business and investment in Australia. So he's got plenty of credentials, and he pulls apart the COVID-19 omnibus bill in his own way. One thing that I have a problem with is, make sure I can find it. Oh yeah, this paragraph here. He says, but I want to make it clear that in my view, given the past dangerous infection situation, with a daily infection rate above 700, Victoria was in a desperate situation. So the government was right and extreme lockdown measures were required to curtail infection, albeit at a huge cost. And thankfully, so far, the lockdown appears to have worked. So what he's saying here is appears to be he appears to be condoning the first wave of lockdown. I probably wouldn't have, but everybody's entitled to their opinion. If you do look up the government websites where they show you the distribution of deaths according to age, find that the deaths are all bunched up in the age groups of 70s, 80s and 90s. The average age of those deaths is about 85. And guess what? The average age, life expectancy age for Victorians is also about 85. And that one item should be enough to tell us that this is a hoax from the start. The other glaring item is that influenza, which is always an issue every year, seems to have disappeared this year. So from my point of view, my view of it, we're being locked down for the common cold. Well, we can possibly congratulate the government for reducing the common cold this year, but that's about it. That's just my view, and not everybody will agree with that, and that's okay. Yeah, he backs it up by saying that we faced a crisis that required extreme action. Well, we got extreme action, and the action got more and more extreme, and it's set to get more extreme if we don't vote down this bill that's coming along. Hopefully some of the class actions will do something about it as well. Yeah, I won't say anything more about that. I'll just scroll through it. For anybody reading the video, they might be able to see the whole story. And let me close that down.
So, George, you think it's now time for John Pace to give his little input?
Yes, I think that's where we are on the schedule. Would that be correct, John?
Yes, that's okay, George.
Do you want me to bring up the picture of that particular story?
No, but I've sent you an email with a bit of text I'd like you to see if you could project on the screen.
Okay, well, I'll try and do that on the fly. Let's see if I can. Ah, yes, there it is. Is it only a short text, 4 lines?
Yes, that's right. Yep.
Okay, well, I'm going to shut down some of my screens, otherwise I'm going to overload my computer and we'll lose the audio.
Anyway, what it's about is that the claim by Mike Adams that Australia already had the powers, implied that it was the whole of Australia, the powers to basically apprehend and detain and arrest people basically for emergency health reasons. But a bit of feedback I got was, well, one, WA has this legislation in place already. I think I saw it was 2018, but there was someone saying it was 2016. But one of my email colleagues came back and said that already in Victoria, the Public Health and Wellbeing Act of 2008 authorises the Chief Medical Officer to issue a public health order requiring a person to receive specified prophylaxis, including a specified vaccination. That was brought up by an ABC report questioning whether or not mandatory vaccination is possible in Victoria. And so it appears that already that is. Now, whether or not the amendments of the omnibus legislation we're trying to stop will actually give the power to force vaccination to other than the police remains to be seen. But it's obviously quite possible. Zachary, you might have more idea about that.
Well, it becomes a political issue, you see, because in the first half of September, our wonderful Prime Minister Scott Morrison gave a radio interview in which he said that once the vaccine was developed, it would be made as mandatory as possible. And then a few hours later, he went on another radio interview and basically backtracked.
Yes.
So what happened in the intervening hours between his first statement on the radio and the second statement on the second radio interview? No one knows, of course, but my speculation, my theory, my guess is that his handlers took him aside and said, Mr. Prime Minister, there's a significant anti-vaxxer movement here in Australia. And these people in the anti-vaxxer movement are going to raise holy hell or unholy hell if you force them to get vaccinated with the COVID-19 vaccine once it becomes available. That's my theory.
Yes.
Scomo doesn't correspond with me via email, so I don't know for sure, but that's my theory. So my theory here in regard to the this part of the 2008 Public Health and Wellbeing Act is that if Daniel Andrews and the new health minister, whoever it is, Martin Pakula, I think it is, or Martin Foley, I think it is, if they thought they could get away with forcing vaccination on Victorians, they certainly would. They certainly would without any question. But they've been informed that there is a small but significant anti-vaxxer movement in this state, as in others. And so they have to be a bit wary about pushing that, because if they pushed it too hard, there would be a very strong pushback against it. That's my opinion anyway.
Yes. Yep. That sounds quite reasonable. Yes. So, look, I haven't got a great deal more to add to this discussion, but having seen this little piece of advice from about the Public Health and Wellbeing Act of 2008, you know, how many of us were aware that already the state and government has got the powers to enforce specified prophylaxis, including a specified vaccination. In other words, it's got the powers to force people to vaccinate against their consent. And
yeah.
that is very concerning as well.
I just wanted
George,
to add that
George, might I contribute something here? And I have a document I can share if it's possible. It's Richard here.
Yeah. Should we let Chandra finish what she was saying and then we'll come back to you?
Sounds good.
Okay.
well, maybe I've got the same document. I received an email from a friend of mine in Queensland, an astrologer, a week or so ago, just commenting about basically early in 2021, there are certain astrological patterns that look like some of these issues that we're talking about, i.e., you know, enforced vaccination may well come to pass. It's one of the many possibilities. Anyway, this friend of mine had put it in an email, which I've sent to you, George, and I also sent it to Zachary, and it lists the current legislation on the various states and territories. And I just thought that might be something that's useful. I've scanned it, and what I took away from it was that they're all quite different. Western Australia is very, very severe. The Northern Territory appears to have, you might find the email, George, that I sent you.
Oh, I can try. Close this one. Oh, here we are.
Yeah, so if you just scan through, it starts with, oh, maybe you can't read it. Ah, that's a problem.
Bring it up.
Can you bring it up?
Yeah. Let's see. It's whether the computer is going to get overloaded. That's the question. It's running at 96% at the moment.
You better shut a few things.
I have already.
Right.
Okay.
So it starts with a bit of an introduction, and I think there's 4 pages there. You just scroll through it to, I don't know where it is, page 2 or page 3, where my friends just put a little bit of an overview. This is, keep going. Yeah.
I'm going through it
I'm happy.
so people can read it if they wish to on the video.
Yes, or you might, I'm happy for it to be sent through. I don't have the permission of the person who sent it to me, so we'll probably have to take out their thing. But he'd sent it publicly to a few people. He knows. Keep going. But the bit that I found interesting was where he stated the current powers state by state.
Okay.
Now, I didn't do this research, but it's been done by someone who I think I have some respect for. And I just found that interesting. You know, that thing of the people in Western Australia being able to be held down and be vaccinated. What I got out of it by looking at it was that basically the place with the least interest in mandatory vaccination appeared to be the Northern Territories. Yeah, but yeah. And I suppose these are just current laws that can be amended should the various states or territories decide to. Interestingly, you'll see there that last paragraph, the ACT, has some of the least restrictive laws. Immunisation is recommended but not mandatory. I thought that was interesting. Yeah, John, I'll send it through to you. Please be aware that I haven't spoken to the friend who sent it to me, but he did send it to several people, so I feel okay in passing it on. I just won't give you his surname, I think. But yeah, this is obviously information that's publicly available in terms of what the current situation is. And I guess it comes back to a state by state or a territory by territory choice, much as we've seen with the borders. And I know astrologically, when Mars moves into Taurus and Saturn moves into Aquarius and stays there early in 2021, this is one of the possibilities, and there are many possibilities that could happen, but one of the possibilities could be government enforcement of things like vaccination, in my opinion.
Yes.
Anyway, that's all I wanted to say, really.
Like a very good summary of each state.
Yeah.
I'm going to have a better look at that down the track myself.
Yes, I should have sent it earlier. I just suddenly remembered that I had it on my computer. I'm happy to send it through. People can just message me if they want me to.
Sorry, George, but I'm going to have to go.
Okay, perhaps we can go on to Richard again.
Sorry, I've got to leave.
Yeah. So, if you can let me share my screen. It says post disabled participants screen sharing. But I put in a Freedom of Information request to DHHS in July, asking two things. The first is that if you look at the Chief Health Officer's website, his responsibility, it says, is provide expert advice on matters relating to the health and well-being of the people of Victoria. So I asked, well, where is the people of Victoria defined in the roles and responsibilities of the Chief Health Officer? And secondly, I asked what is the head of power that gives the Chief Health Officer's jurisdiction over a subject of the Queen? And surprise, surprise, no documents exist for either point. So they don't define what people of Victoria are in terms of roles and responsibilities, and they don't claim that they have jurisdiction over sovereigns of the Queen. Okay, so it's just a farce. It's just if you acquiesce to these state dictats, then you get what you get. But quite frankly, I walk around this state of Victoria knowing that I'm a subject of the Queen, and the rules don't apply. If anyone wants to challenge me, then I can pull this out and just demonstrate that I've actually asked and done my homework, and lo and behold, nobody's claiming to have jurisdiction over me in these matters.
Yeah.
So, you know, they can threaten and they can coerce as much as they like, but it really comes down to us as men and women of the land knowing where we stand, because they've got nothing on us.
I like that. I like those comments. I really heartily endorse them. Thank you very much.
Mm.
Can you bring it up on the screen?
Have a go. No, it says host disabled participant screen share. So
Okay, let me try and fix that. It's hard to find where to do it. Advanced sharing options. One at a time. Okay, try now.
All right, let's see how we go. Bingo. You see that now, George?
Aha, look at it. Oh, I know which Richard now.
There you go. There you go. Department of Health and Human Services.
Thank you, Richard.
It's been a while, George.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So there you go. So this is just what's on the website, and the head of power providing jurisdiction of the Chief Health Officer over a subject to the Queen. On the basis of the request, it has been determined that no documents can be located. So it's just a bluff. Straight out bluff. They got nothing.
Would you recommend that we all get a printout of this and carry it with us until the day we need it?
That's what I do. I've got a printout in the car, so that if I'm out and about and somebody pulls me over, then I can refer them to it.
Yeah, yeah, because you know it comes down to how do you enforce these sort of things? You know, if you've got a bunch of thugs, even though they got badges on themselves, trying to force things on you, and you produce your little bit of paper, they're going to say, "Oh, what's only a bit of paper?" Who knows? You know, it depends on how militant they're all going to get, and we can only do the best we can.
Yeah, there's all of that. So I mean, you have to pick your fights. And if it was just a cop by the side of the road, then that would be different to, you know, taking it to a court of law or wanting to, you know, if things got really serious.
What they're talking about, they're brilliant.
Well, we'll get you to send that to us. So that
I've put it up on my blog. I'll just send the link in the chat.
Okay.
George,
Yeah.
can I add something or say something at the moment? Is that okay, or are we waiting?
That hands.
Yeah.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. Look, something that occurred to me before, and probably has occurred to every of you as well, is that a lot of the legislation that suffering at the moment is well, not left over, but continuing on from the legislation that was put in place after 9/11. Arrest without, and just, being able to think about something before you and under arrest rather than doing anything. I'm wondering about, with regard to this, whether we need to defeat the whole idea of the pandemic and the fact that the whole thing's a fraud. Otherwise, they're always going to have a basis to build on to some other real threat or something like that to legislation that may or may not be put in at the moment. I've CLR group and there's a lot more, there's sort of Doctors for Truth in Spain and Netherlands and Belgium, which I'm sure, you're all aware of, is this growing body of professionals and, actually governments and that sort of thing. And I'm just sort of wondering, where the campaign that we're involved in, what the game is for it, and whether it's just about, that was my thought about, how far we need to go not defeating legislation, but defeating the whole story that's been created, which probably, I think probably all of us would be aware of, you know, the fact that the whole thing is a concoction and a fraud, and that it needs to be dealt with at that level, you know, in its roots, as it were. Right? Just the thought.
Yeah, we lost some of the audio there. I might just mute everybody and can I get you to repeat? Hang on a sec. Oh yeah, can I get you to repeat just a summary of what you were trying to say, and that might be sufficient.
Yeah. I think we need to defeat the story and not just the government's reaction, or, you know, it's obviously a reaction because you know, the creation of this whole fraud. They need to deal with the actual story as well, not just what the government's doing in relationship to, you know, to the you know, concoction or story, and not just stop at, okay.
Yeah.
Gone. He disappeared.
Oh, where is he gone?
There he is now.
Okay.
So look, I think I get what he's trying to say. That is, that
I've actually got a here.
Yeah,
gone.
Your connection's awful.
Yeah, it might be actually your computer that's produced.
Mine.
Yeah.
Yeah, I believe you.
Yeah, if it's useful to know how to bring up your CPU performance, your task manager, to see how heavily your computer is being used. And mine's running 80–90%, and yours might be going higher than that, and that's when you start to lose the audio. But so far we're doing pretty well. You know, I think most of us have got our messages through. I wanted to bring something up as well. I need to refresh a page and then I'll bring it up. Otherwise, it won't be clear. So,
George,
yeah.
Yeah, just can I just because of that interruption in what I was saying, could you summarise or what I tried to say so that I know what I said got across with those interruptions?
Oops, sorry, I missed that. I missed some of that as well.
The audio isn't up to scratch, hand.
It sounds terrible, actually. Look, George, I might reboot my computer. So if you let in when I come back in again, okay?
Can you type something in the chat screen?
Oh, yeah.
I'll read it out.
Okay.
Too long.
I think John said good night.
Yes.
Is that right, John?
Yes, I've got to go, George. So.
Okay. Well, thanks very much.
Night, John.
Good night, everyone. Thanks for this discussion.
And you've mentioned Graham might be saying something soon. All right, so we're just waiting for Hans to type something, and I'll try and put something as well. Yes, I'm going to share the screen again. Now, can you see that? Yeah, that's our YouTube channel. And I've already uploaded last Monday's session. You know, Zachary did most of the presentation tonight, but he also did most of the presentation on Monday. And it was about the Archangel's Week session. It goes through it went through what, 7 of the archangels and allocated them a day each, and it was Archangel Gabriel on the day that we did it, and Archangel Michael on the Saturday, and that all had all special energies, and that was a pretty fascinating presentation from last Monday. And
George, I wonder if you could just share your address for your YouTube channel, and I'll be able to share that Archangel presentation further afield.
there it is, right at the top.
I can't copy it though. Can you put it in the chat?
Yeah, pop it in the chat, George. That would be good.
Okay, I'll put it in the chat. And
Thank you.
just a word on it. It's still unlisted. If the participants, if they're happy with it, then I'll make it public. But what is public is we've got 2 sessions of conversation and miracles. They went very well over the last couple of weeks on the Mondays. And we've also got 2 weeks of John, who's just left us tonight. One on complementary alternatives for viral conditions. And he's basically saying there, get in the sunlight, because that's one of the most powerful remedies against these viral conditions, right? And also vitamin D supplements if you don't get enough sunshine. And then the following week, we covered voltage rather than pharmaceuticals is the key to health. The voltage is referring to the voltage of the cells in the body.
Hey, George.
Yeah.
What about applying voltage to the reckless oligarchs that are taking over the world?
What do you want to do? Electroshock them, do you?
That's the one.
Oh, yeah.
That's my spiritual side talking, giving them a little bit of leeway.
Well, even the spiritual information says sometimes we must go to war, not to hurt back, but to demonstrate an aspect of who we are with an aspect of who we are not.
Well, Jesus did crack the whip in his father's temple, didn't he?
Yeah, and also turn the other cheek.
Well, turning the other cheek may not necessarily be sitting there like a llama waiting for your head to get chopped off by the CCP, but maybe that turning the other cheek may well be every time your family knocks that great book out of your hand, you turn the other cheek and you bend over, you pick up that book, and you turn that next leaf and you keep reading to them.
Yeah, well, even the highest of the spiritual information says that abuse is not acceptable. If you do not give the message back to your abuser that they are abusing you and say it's not acceptable, you're allowing the abuse to continue. So you need to speak up. The latest, some of the latest stuff is talking about see no evil, speak no evil. What's the third one?
Hear no evil.
Hear no evil. It doesn't work. You have to know what you want, what it is you need to change. You need to speak out, otherwise you'll continue to be abused. Your abuser finds it acceptable to continue the abuse. So that's what we're doing tonight.
It seems to be there are many health slaves out there, given the excursions that I've had with the masks and face coverings.
Huh?
Plenty of house slaves out there with their masks on.
Oh, well. Shall we forgive them for they know not what they do?
Yeah.
Yeah, or belt them around with as much love as we can muster, because maybe that's what they need. Yeah, there's definitely a balance, but we can't be idle about these issues, that's for sure. I've got a 5G as the key here. but I've taken that down, and if you ask me privately, I'll tell you why. Anyway, there's a bunch of other stuff that's on there as well. It goes back many months, many years, in fact. And perhaps if we do get the opportunity to start having gatherings again, we'll get some of these players back in to the forums. Some of the most brilliant minds on common and constitutional law, world class in my opinion. We need to get that going again. We've been locked down for too long. Anyway, that's my little...
Yeah, agreed, George. We need that going again.
Yeah, I don't join in on the Facebook mishmash of information. And quite frankly, I think in a lot of ways it's dangerous. You know, if we're not using secure communications, then we're putting ourselves at risk. We're currently trying to settle on something that's a bit more secure than Zoom, and Signal and maybe Minds and maybe Jammy might do it, but they're all so new. They got a host of bugs associated with them. But you know, one of them's going to become the leader, and the other ones will follow. Sooner or later, we'll be able to get onto something a bit more secure. That's what I think, anyway. You're welcome to drop in and say hi now. We can do that now, can't we?
That's true.
Hi.
I've actually got some interesting stuff to share with you, but I'm not going to do it now. Okay.
No worries.
All right. Okay, we're on general discussion now, aren't we, Zachary? Whoops, you're muted. You're still muted, Zachary.
Okay, I should be unmuted now.
Okay, yeah.
Yes, anyone who wants to jump in and ask questions or throw out a comment, go for it. Now's the time.
Hey, Zach, it's Paula.
Hello, Paula.
Just saying hello. Oh,
Hello there, Paula.
You've got very brilliant people around you. I'm so pleased to listen to all of this, and I thank you for inviting me.
My pleasure, Paula.
Maybe we can talk soon.
Yeah, I'll answer your email today. I was just too busy preparing for tonight. So I will answer you probably tonight or tomorrow.
Yeah, I knew that. Yep. And hello to Mary.
We'll do that.
Okay. All right, gang. That's from me.
Okay, see ya. Au revoir.
I just recently read that the United Nations has come out and said we're in it for the long haul with the masks.
Yep. Yeah. That's the problem when Saturn moves into Aquarius in January.
Oh.
Well, it's a potential problem. It's a potential problem.
Yeah, let's blame the planets.
Oh, no. It's to do with the expression of the vibrations. Of course, the best expression of Saturn in Aquarius is communities based on the heart and goodwill. And the worst expression of Saturn in Aquarius is authority figures using the digital world to control us.
Yes.
And we have free will. So, you know, somewhere in the middle, maybe it won't happen, but it certainly can't be ruled out from an astrological perspective. If we had more people with more goodwill and more compassion or more personal responsibility, we wouldn't have authority figures trying to control the masses in such a way. And of course, the more they go in that extreme, the more we get kickback in all kinds of other ways that can be very violent, you know, civil wars and the like.
I'd go along with all that, what you're saying. When it comes down to basics and cause rather than effect, these are all spiritual issues. You won't solve them using the regular methods like political or educational or military or political, you name it. That's all the man-made stuff. This is a spiritual issue. Once we elevate our values and our awareness, those things just go away. You know, once we get enough critical mass, which is represents just a small amount of the population, it starts sweeping through the population in a telepathic manner, known as the 100th monkey syndrome. I've heard stories saying we are at critical mass, or sometimes the stories say, oh no, we haven't quite reached it. It's certainly a war between good and evil, according to that article I mentioned before. And even though those terms don't really exist, we use those to help to define ourselves. So if we don't declare something as evil, then that's the biggest evil. We must do that. And
Totally agree.
there's a quote actually from Disappearance of the Universe. You know, that's one of the study material books that we do on the Monday. And it says, if I can remember it, it says, most people, especially nice spiritual people, don't want to know about the murderous thought system that runs this universe. When I read that, that really cut me up, sort of thing. But that's true. That's true. It's quite a predatory universe. We prey on each other. However, we can transcend that. We can move beyond it. And that's one of the reasons why we're here. We've chosen to be here, to be part of this experiment, to see whether we can evolve to a level where we don't rip the guts out of each other anymore, and ultimately ascend to a higher dimension, as many other races have.
Amen.
And of course, the key thing in there is free will, really, isn't it? Seems to me that's the wild card in all of it, is how we use our free will. And I find it interesting to observe it, and I guess being able to take a middle path where I'm respectful of people who disagree with me, but I hold to my own sort of inner principles. It seems to me that's the best thing that I can do as an individual.
Mm. One of my favourite stories regarding awareness, if you want to accept the idea that, or I'll give you a quote first, and it's from the study material. It says that an awakened species always uses metaphysics, and humans in an unawakened state do not, right?
Yes.
And so we can acknowledge perhaps that metaphysics includes intuition, right?
Yes.
And
definitely.
yeah, there's it's one of my favorite stories, which comes from the shaman sorcerer material that I work with, and it says the apprentice is challenging the master, and the apprentice says to the master, well, what are you going to do if somebody pulls a rifle on you? How are you going to stop the bullet? And the master, he kind of scratches his head. He says, what are you trying to say to me? You know, should I be scared of the rifle and the bullet? And the apprentice says, yes, how are you going to stop that bullet? And the master says, well, I can't stop the bullet. However, I simply won't be around. I won't be there. I will not attract that situation. And that's an intuitive-based idea based on two elements, trust and faith.
Wonderful.
We're told that faith can move mountains, and if you're willing to go along with that very, very simple idea, you can rely on that that faith and that trust. One of the great quotes is that on trust is that the dark is inherently blind and cannot see, and that's for an obvious reason because the lights are out. Whereas the light sees all and will always win. If you're on the light side, the dark can't touch you. And that's why David Icke, if you've watched David Icke's life story, then he'll tell you that he was told as early as 1990 that he's going to be on the world stage, revealing this sort of information, but that he will be protected. Otherwise, he wouldn't be alive today. Yeah. So take it from David Icke. Don't just take it from me. And you know, in recent years, he's revealed the metaphysics that he's worked with for 30 years. Right? In the early days, he said that he would not share that information because everybody thought he was nuts.
Oh, mate.
Yeah. Right? That's my little speech on that.
Just can I?
Hang on, Hans, your audio's off again.
While we wait for Hans to get back, isn't truth seeking itself a spiritual task?
Truth speaking.
Truth seeking, or like unraveling the truth, or finding what is not to find out what is.
Yes, of course. In the yoga traditions, it's called swadhyaya, which is self-study. Right? It's your duty to be informed through spiritual texts or whatever information is coming to you. It could be the next movie you watch. It could be when you open the fridge, the whatever produce is in the fridge might give you a message. It doesn't matter where it comes from. It's all divine anyway. Anyway. You're back on now, Jolly? No, you're frozen. Oh, never mind. Yeah, so if people are interested in the more spiritual side of things, then join us on Monday for Conversations and Miracles. We've had 3 sessions so far, and we've got some surprises coming along with some special guests in the next couple of weeks.
George, could I just make a comment about that subject of the Queen topic that came up earlier?
Okay.
A man said, a constitutional guy who's a bit of an expert said to me last night that the whole thing is that everything here is being run by CEOs of corporations, including Daniel Andrews, and that's one of the reasons that they don't know anything when it comes to who hired the contractors, because of the manslaughter laws that Daniel Andrews brought in February this year, or January, or whenever it was. And so if anybody said they knew anything about it, then they would be up for his own manslaughter laws, including himself. So the fact that they all know, the police, the courts, the government all know that they have ABNs. They all know that, and you can download last year's police report. It's a corporate report for the Victorian Police. So they all know that it's corporations that run everything. They all know that Vic Fines, or Fines Vic, doesn't exist, just simply doesn't exist. I even know of the man who registered with ASIC the name Fines Victoria. So they're going to have to change that name. But anyway, it doesn't exist. Of course, if you go there, there's cameras and, you know, I've been in there, but actually as a legal entity, it doesn't exist. So I haven't gone into it, but I believe Serco is the one that pays everybody. So anyway, but getting back to the subject of the Queen, they all know that they've pulled, it's deception, and it's our consent to the deception because we haven't done our due diligence, our own personal due diligence. By law, they have to put everything in the public. Their ABNs are all in the public. Everything they do is in the public. Their lies are in the public. Daniel Andrews has blatantly lied in the public to the point that one of a friend of mine who supports him said to me on Monday, he said, oh, well, probably 50% of what he said is a lie, but I still think he's doing a good job. Anyway, it's all in the public. So it's our own, we are to blame. It's our own self-deception that we do not stand, we do not stand as subjects of the Queen under the Constitution, which was the original federating Constitution, and everything that preceded that, that created that. Because it's only through deception and our acceptance of that deception from Gough Whitlam onwards and Bob Hawke and all of that, that we just allow it to go on because, you know, the wine on the peninsula is pretty good. We've got nice beaches and bloody, you know, blah, blah. But the fact is, it's self-deception. And they've always got that to stand to come back. Well, you know, we've shown you, we've all got ABNs, we're all, you know, Daniel Andrews is the CEO. It's all out there. So we have to carry the flag of that piece of paper that that guy put up fortuitously for us. And we've got to know that stuff and show the police. The police are only working for a private corporation, and you have to tell them that and show them their rules of engagement, show them their oath that they've taken, ask them what the badge on their shoulder means, all of these things, you know, just in a very personable way. And a constable just only takes one constable can arrest Daniel Andrews if he's got the guts. But once he does that, Daniel Andrews is arrested. It's all in the public, but it just takes someone who's got the guts, and he has, you know, make sure people have got his back. Because if you and I go in there to try and arrest him, we never get anywhere near him. And then we're going to hand it back to his friends, right? So,
I have a question.
That's the plate. That's the you know, the plate that we've been dealt, or the hand that we've been dealt. So, you know, it's a spiritual thing to really step onto that square and own our position as subjects of the Queen. But we've actually got to know it at the intellectual level, so we can perform when we need to perform.
I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt here.
Put it back.
It's not a spiritual thing to be a subject of anybody.
I understand that, but the thing that we're dealing with is fear within ourselves, and that's a spiritual thing. It's a quest.
I don't have fear of anything or anyone, and I can tell you now, I'm certainly not a subject of any queen.
Yeah, but
that's the language that they
got to start somewhere. I understand that's what you're saying, but that's not where it ends.
Not where it ends.
You know, I'm not saying where it ends, but that's just the card with myself. That's where we were born.
Thing. When you can say that the Constitution, which is the law of the land that we all abide by, that you're a subject of the Queen and it's defined, then the police officer has no comeback. I mean, I get what you're saying, that we don't want to be subject to anyone. We are, you know, we're stopping up ourselves, but It's a pretty easy way to knock any argument out to this nonsense. I just wanted to comment on what DM was saying about the deception that's going on, because it's in full view at the moment. Because this was last week, this was last Friday, this time last week. The top ones were claimed to be Dan Andrews, and the bottom ones were Dan Andrews in the press conference. And they're not the same individual, they're not the same human, but they might both be Dan Andrews. And you know, I think this is the duality. This is the deception in full force. I suspect that the one at the top, the young-looking fellow, I think that's maybe the proper Dan Andrews because he was under oath. And the bottom one's an actor. That's my theory.
Golly.
So you're claiming that Dan Andrews has a double.
I'm claiming that
lookalike.
fronts the cameras is an actor.
At least a double.
I don't think he's a very good double, so I don't think he's a double.
Okay, well, I mean, there may be some validity. I can't say one way or the other. I certainly know that in America, there are a lot of body doubles or lookalikes that have been replacing quite prominent political figures over the past 4 years. And to look into that's too long to go into in this discussion, but some very interesting things going on in regard to that. Yeah. So you might be right, but I don't know. I don't know.
But the only reason I think that the guy at the top is the real one is he's under oath. When he's making these statements, he's under oath. The guy at the bottom is just, he's there for acting on TV. So I think he's the actor. So that's where I'm at. So I agree with what you're saying, that I think it's, you know, it's spiritual. It's a play for the minds of the population. That, you know, the code is blown out of all proportion into something that it's not. And, you know, it's just a fear-based thing. I think, you know, Chandra, you were talking about the key dates that are coming up and the alignment.
Very.
You know, the way that the universe is progressing at the moment. We see that, I believe there's a big corroboree due on the 21st of December, which is also a major alignment in the solar system. So there's a hell of a lot going on. You've also got 10, 10, 20, which is the Masonic number of all Masonic numbers about to come up in a week's time. You know, it's all happening right now. And you
That's my uncle's birthday.
That's your birthday?
That's my uncle's birthday.
Oh, your uncle's birthday. Well, maybe he'll start walking on water on his birthday.
I don't know. He's in his 80s. He'd be going well.
I wonder if anyone else picked up a story from about the prior week, and what it was the Belarusian president,
Alexander Lukashenko.
Yeah, an offshoot of the Soviet Union, probably, because I'd never even heard of the country before.
Belarus.
And according to the story, the Belarusian president turned down a payment of close to $1 billion to lock down his people, right? And he turned it down, and I thought, okay, well, is this story real? And so I did a comprehensive search, and I found 3 other places on the internet which confirmed the story. And one of those resources was actually a Russian news item. And, you know, I'm not saying the Russian news media is any more honest than the westernized media, but it went into more depth on the story. And the conclusion I made from all those references was that our own politicians are perhaps gutless and accepted the bribes. He refused the bribes. And I think that's what's going on at the highest level. It's a Gates, a World Health Organization, and International Monetary Fund, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, organised event
Yeah.
I also believe that, so if you go back in history, I was just listening to something today, they were giving the history of, and Zachary, you might be able to fill in a bit, because it's the American history, the American Revolution and the War of Independence were separated by 70 years because the American government defaulted on its debt, every 70 years. If you roll it forward, you come to 70 years with 1999. You then add 20 years to figure out everything else. Basically, in 2019, the US government defaulted again. And so,
you see,
and the entire monetary system of the world has defaulted. Now, of course, Melbourne's got a lot of major banks. So I think that there's a lot going on in terms of finance. And I reckon if you went around town, there'd be the IMF in town trying to restructure things.
Well, you see, there are all sorts of theories, and I'll throw one theory out now, that in 2018 or 2019, the secret military junta that actually is running America took over power from President Obama in October 2015, took back power from the US Federal Reserve, and has now actually liberated the nation and has paid off most of the national debt of 20 trillion. That's a theory you may not have heard. It's one I happen to believe, and so there are all sorts of theories, you see. But if your main point, or one of your main points, is that follow the money trail and you'll find the truth, I would say yes, that's quite correct. Follow the money trail and you'll get to the truth eventually, because we live in a very materialistic world, especially when it comes to leaders of government. In regard, George, to Alexander Lukashenko and the IMF and World Bank, I said this last week, I think it was. Lukashenko is a small dictator and a petty thief. The IMF and the World Bank are major dictators, major thieves. So Lukashenko is telling his people in the world, trust me, I'm protecting Belarus against the velvet fist of the IMF and World Bank. But let's be honest, Lukashenko has some ulterior motives, let us say, in making that statement. Maybe he did, I don't know. Also, if you want to look at why President Putin is basically protecting Lukashenko and Belarus, take a look at the map of Russia in relation to Belarus. Take a look at how far Minsk, the capital of Belarus, is from Moscow, and it'll all be revealed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, something we've conferred on, Zachary, is that if the level of consciousness of a race is high enough, then we will be protected from higher dimensional beings. If the consciousness level is below that threshold, they have to step away, because then it would be interfering with our free will.
Exactly. That's exactly right. That's an excellent point, George.
Yeah, we've got the free will to go down a destructive path, and that's part of the experiment of being on this planet, and any planet that you might join in on. And so
ways to enhance that consciousness is using crystals.
Using what? Crystals?
Yes.
Yeah.
Like salt crystals, like fluoride.
What?
Fluoride?
Yeah, that's a salt, isn't it?
Not fluoride.
Isn't fluoride a salt?
No.
Could be.
I mean, if you're talking things like quartz and I think that's a quartz one there, Zach, is it?
I mean, we can enhance everyone's consciousness with fluoride and
not fluoride. Not fluoride.
I guess all the metals technically are salts as well in the periodic table.
Yeah, they're on.
Aluminium, barium, strontium.
No, none of them. No, they're bad. Aluminium, barium, strontium are bad, especially in
down even further, and then blame it on them. Blame the stupidity on them because they've been fluoridated. Big pharma has just kicked in and just completely wiped everyone out. Can I go on, or should I just leave it there?
Up to you.
I could bring up I'm going to bring up a share screen, which I would recommend.
No, I don't understand how they can get off the hook by claiming that they told us what they're doing by covertly doing it in the back of some newspaper with a little ad saying we're going to do this to you, and if you don't object, then it's tacit law that you are accepted.
Loophole in galactic law, mate. So it's a bit of a loophole. It's underhanded and it's dirty, but it's legit. But we have to recognise the predictive programming when it's around, and hopefully we've got enough.
Who says it's legit, Chris?
People that will resist it, yeah.
But Chris, who says it's legit?
Well, the result.
Someone that's got a Masonic Bible on their bench.
Tony, if it wasn't legit, they wouldn't get away with it.
No, it's legit because people have been dumbed down.
No. It's nothing to do
Deliberately.
with us. It's nothing to do with us. It's to do with. Oh, forget it.
Well, actually, Tony mentioned barium and strontium, and probably aluminium and a few other things, and we've got information saying that those are some of the chemtrail ingredients, right? I think we've got some agreement on that, and it's an issue that we've highlighted for many years. We've played a lot of the movies on it, and when Foster Gamble was in Australia, I had a good chat with him about chemtrails, and I was giving out DVDs on chemtrails. What in the world are they spraying? Why in the world are they spraying? But I listened to this podcast a couple of weeks ago from the medical medium guy, and there's information in there which I'd never heard before. The chemtrails go actually, according to his information, go right back to before World War I, when the big chemical companies started producing these very toxic cocktails, and they were actually used as nerve gas in the First World War, and they produced so much of it that they didn't know what to do with it. So they came up with this ingenious, you could say, solution. Oh, let's just spray it and release it slowly. And so it started happening a long time ago, where we had passenger planes, which are okay. We had cargo planes, which are okay. But then you had a third type of plane, which was not okay. It was actually deliberately there to release chemtrails into the sky and get rid of this product which they didn't know what to do with. And it's become a more sinister thing. It's all part of nature, I guess, but I wouldn't recommend those sort of chemicals in the atmosphere for us to breathe and to affect the biology of all things.
There's a small problem with that theory, George.
Yep.
There are multiple purposes for chemtrails, as we call them, and there are some military applications which have nothing to do with getting rid of byproducts.
Oh, for sure, yeah. It would have.
These weren't accidents; these were developed.
Yeah, I'm sure they were. Yeah, it's a military weapon as well. If you can control somebody else's weather or some other country's weather, that's a very powerful military weapon.
So there's weather, there's biology, there's one of the applications is as a rocket shield, believe it or not. So it actually forms a reflective surface in the stratosphere that can be heated up. So you can actually heat it up with certain frequencies, and then any incoming intercontinental ballistic missile can be shot out of the sky. Basically, it can be vaporized through the shield. So there are a number of military applications that most people haven't heard about, and it's only through some deep digging of my own that I've discovered these. There was actually the term chemtrail didn't come from the outside community. It came from a training program from within the US Air Force. That was where the term chemtrail was originally.
Where did it come from? Sorry.
A training program within the US AFA.
Okay. Yeah.
The Air Force Academy.
Yeah, it's all the mark of a primitive society, isn't it?
Mm.
Yeah, and that's what the again the spiritual material is talking about. We are a very young species. We're hardly out of kindergarten, and it's not a surprise that we're having trouble finding our way.
Yeah, well, I mean, a lot of the problems come from the idea that that there should be any such thing as state secrets. I mean, who's paying for that?
Well, we haven't grown up as a species.
I've always felt that the very idea of state secrets is anathema to any freedom-seeking individual.
Mm. Yeah, some of the earlier discussion, it was talking about the powers that be, and
Now, can you wash out everything and clean up out the back?
Paul's got a microphone.
somebody's doing the washing up.
Paul's got a microphone.
Paul up in Ballina, New South Wales.
Yeah. What was I saying?
Well, yeah, I think you were talking. Sorry.
The powers that be are, we can't separate them from us. We like to blame someone else for the problems, and yet the quote that I've given a number of times is, governments corrupt to the core are only corrupt because the people themselves are corrupt. And once the consciousness of the population raises, they won't attract those governments anymore. We can't separate ourselves from those people doing these things to us. We're doing it to ourselves as well. And, you know, an example of that is the situation around the world where the figures are something like 8,000 children starved per day. That doesn't make sense. That's an atrocious element for this species. We've got to grow up because there is no need for that. One of the issues I've had, let's say I've had a bit of a battle with over the years, in the 15 years that we've been here and been running this centre, is environmentalists, not necessarily environmentalists, these are people that are concerned about the environment and things like that, and they come to the conclusion that there's too many people in the earth, right? And I took objection to that, and I looked them in the eye and I said, well, who would you like to get rid of first? Right?
Yeah.
That puts them on the spot, you know.
It wouldn't be them.
Well, it reveals the hypocrisy of what they're trying to say.
Yep.
It's not necessarily too many people. It's actually a lack of will, right? If you are able to share the resources in a way where nobody has to suffer, nobody has to starve.
I fully agree.
Yeah, it's kind of common sense, isn't it?
Why is it culturally sanctioned and almost expected that you grow lawn instead of food?
Grow what, sorry?
Why do you grow lawn?
I don't grow a lawn.
I'm saying people grow lawns. I don't grow lawns. I grow food.
Yeah. Well, something that has been very strong over the last couple of years here is talking about and raising the issue about growing food, right? And one of the best documentaries we showed late last year was The Need to Grow. And that documentary tells us that the world is running out of topsoil because of the way we're farming it. Corporate farmers destroy the soil.
Correct.
Yeah, they churn up the soil, turn it upside down, which then exposes the soil to the elements. And that's like you or I spending a freezing night out in the paddock with no clothes on. And
in addition to that, they spray it with glyphosate, and glyphosate is anti-life.
yeah, and then they put chemicals on it to try and restore the.
Glyphosate is the big problem.
Yeah, it's an insane way to go, and by us congregating in big cities the way we are, we're making it worse. You know, we're part of the problem by crowding ourselves into big cities, because the food does not come from the big city. It comes from corporate farms, right? We used to have hundreds of thousands of farmers in this country. I think the figure I've seen is it's down to 40,000, right? And perhaps decentralization is one of the ways to deal with that situation. One of the most powerful ways I've seen for addressing that issue is, you know, apart from going back to the way the indigenous people used to run the country, I don't think we can do that right now. But one of the most powerful ways is the water projects. I've mentioned this before, where the Murray-Darling system, the Snowy Hydro River Scheme, actually brought water to an area larger than Victoria, in an area which was largely desert, right? So it became one of the food bowls of the world. And then some idiots privatised the water. How insane is that?
Well, not insane when you consider that they all got made out like bandits.
Well, they were bandits, all right. And
they made us an absolute.
Why is he an idiot though, George?
Oh,
why is he an idiot?
Who's the idiot? Us, probably.
Well, we let them.
I mean, we allowed it to happen.
Yeah, we weren't looking at the time, perhaps.
That's like what it's like telling someone, why do you let your fist run into my? Why do you let your face run into my fist?
Thanks, Tony.
Thanks for that one, Tony.
I'm talking about a schoolyard bully.
The point is, there's actually plenty of water projects that can be done in this country that have been on the drawing board for decades, maybe even 100 years, and we've only done one of them. We've only done the Murray-Darling scheme. What do you reckon, Richard? You're waving.
Is that good night?
Oh, right. Okay.
Yep, got to go. Catch you later. Thanks, George. Thanks,
Yeah,
everybody.
we probably need to finish up anyway. It's 10 o'clock. But thanks for coming, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks, Richard.
See you later.
Night, everyone.
All right. So unless there's much more to say, then we can call it a night. And if you like, join us on Monday. And are we allowed to have gatherings yet? How about we start the cinema? Because there is a documentary I really want to show, and it's about food. It's called The Biggest Little Farm.
Something's happening on the 19th of October. Regards gatherings and things of that nature. They're easing some of the restrictions regarding, you know, people going into to homes to do installations and things like that. So I imagine something's happening on that day.
Okay.
I heard you could, the chemist told me you could play tennis now.
Tennis?
Yeah, apparently.
Oh. As long as you stay on opposite sides of the net, right? No doubles.
Who knows? Gosh.
It's all crazy, really. But
Oh yeah.